Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our Thursday meeting. I'm sad to share out that the cold virus has gone through several commissioners. So we will be missing David, who's going to stay home and continue to recover. April did her very best yesterday, but has called it in and gone home to drink hot tea and to get into bed. So we are going to wish them the best of health in the very near future and thank them for coming yesterday. But we are down a couple commissioners today, but we have gained one because Mike is back. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Giving us his time on his first year of college, which I'm following faithfully on Facebook and reliving all those days of starting school and college. It's so exciting. So thanks for being here, Mike.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Tell us how all is going and give us all a little update about you.
College is busy. Very stressful. A lot of coffee and Red Bull. Top ramen too. Top ramen. Whatever it can get. Right now, just college, and I'm competing in bodybuilding over the summer, so I've been prepping for that for 5 months. Thank you. Other than that, I'm good. Just tired, but I'm here. That's it. Thank you.
The top ramen reminded me, I went out on a date in college once, and the young gentleman made me, his best dish was Kraft macaroni and cheese with a can of tuna and some frozen peas. And he said that he lived on that, and that covered all the bases, and really a person didn't need any more than that. So we only went on one date, but that did it. I'm glad it worked for him, though. So we are going to have a great day today. Mike, we have 2 new commissioners. We have Christine sitting right next to you and Dawn right across from you. Mike is our student commissioner. So we have 1 or 2 of those at every meeting, which is always very helpful. Before we get started, Kristen wanted to do some introductions. Right, Kristen?
I was remiss yesterday to mention one of our other fabulous employees in the special ed division, Angela Hansen-Musset. She has been with us for 7 years now, and I had the opportunity to work with her when I first started working in the division in the policy unit. But she is here assisting with the commission, and she is a resource to you. She's also one of our big culture builders in the division. You'll always find Angela doing the extra little things to make sure that people feel like we are a warm and happy place to work, and we really need those people. So grateful to have her here. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't introduce you yesterday, but very happy to have you here working with us, and welcome to the commissioners to introduce themselves to Angela later if they haven't already.
Thank you. I love those culture builders. I need them desperately working around me. They make everything better. Do you want to do the call to order, Erin?
Yes. Michelle Andrus.
Here.
Don Hamilton. Summer Harding. Havanya Hayes-White. Sarah Jocham. April Lopez. Christina Mills. Christine Oyakawa.
Here.
Dina Plate.
Here.
Kimberly Salmonson. Janine Topalian.
Here.
David Toston. Steve Winlock. Mike Infante.
Here.
Have enough for a quorum.
Gina, I didn't ask you ahead of time because I'm in denial that this might be your last meeting, but would you like to do the flag salute today? Okay. I'll go ahead and review the agenda for today since David's out. So we have our item number 11 is our update on the statewide system of support. We'll be hearing from Carla Estrada. And then we have our update on AB 2657. There's a work group, and several of us, I think, are working on that work group. And so we'll hear more information about that. We have commissioner updates and liaison reports, our state special education director's report later in the morning, and then general public comment. And remember, we have our early outs for those of us that travel to make those earlier afternoon flights. So we will get started. I do know that I was remiss in asking yesterday if there might be anyone that would be willing to be, or a few of you, to be a reader for our goal award. This is something where we have those that apply to the goal award. It's coming up next meeting, I think. And we need to have those readers in place. Michelle, you've done it before? Okay. And is there anyone else? Steve, too? Okay, perfect. So thank you for that. We will put you down for that. We've reviewed the agenda. I think we're a little bit early, but Carla's here. Carla, would you like to be ready to go? Okay. So introducing Dr. Estrada, and she's going to give us some information on the statewide system of support.
So thank you, commissioners, for inviting me here today to be able to share with you an update on the California system of support. I was here last year when the system of support and leads were just being identified and the work was just beginning. And so I wanted to be able to have the opportunity to be able to share with you what the progress has been and gather just your thoughts as well as always on what is actually aligning to what you're seeing and especially the seats that you represent. Before I move forward, I want to just thank the CDE and the State Board of Education. We work in partnership as we support and continue to really live the vision of the system of support in working with districts and schools. And so although I'm here presenting, I just want you to know that it's a collaborative effort as we continue to do this work. So my time today really is to highlight for you the system of support in particular as it relates to students with disabilities. And I hope what you really see as a theme is the partnerships. The last time we were here, we really were explaining how the system of support really should be a one-door access for districts and schools. And what you're starting to see is how everyone's coming together to really serve all students and being able to leverage each other's skills and talents and resources and expertise to be able to be a resource to those districts and schools. And so I want to highlight some of those today to make it really concrete. I also think that, we've all been reflecting on what the system of support has been able to provide in its first year. We have, for example, with the SELPA Leads, a retreat we're planning in the coming months. And so we really want to think about how do we continue to evolve and grow as we leverage those skills and talents, especially as we're supporting our LEAs, because those are the folks that are most closest to our kids. And so we want to make sure that they are really feeling that the system of support is working for them. So as I highlight today the skill sets and these partnerships, I just wanted to ground everybody back, as I know there are some new members, on the system of support. The system of support consists of county offices, SELPAs, other leaders in a variety of different areas such as multi-tiered systems of support. You would have leads in the area of equity. You have leads in the area of community engagement. You have leads in early math initiatives. And the idea really is, how do we create a place of network and resources that districts and schools, based on their data, would be able to access and utilize in order to improve the outcomes that they are unfortunately not experiencing in some areas within their systems. And so the geographic leads in particular are, I think I have already a slide on that. The geographic leads in particular are folks who are working with our county offices of education in order to address issues of inequity overall, making sure that they fully understand what are the areas within our California School Dashboard that are showing that students, for example, that are not getting those kinds of experiences of success, as much as schools that may be experiencing that in districts. As you also know, our county offices of education are responsible for the differentiated assistance that our schools and districts in many ways are receiving. And so the two that I'd like to highlight today are Kern County Office of Education. And what's really great about their work so far has been that they've been partnering with our SELPA leads who are really focused on working on building capacity and leveraging and being a facilitator of resources to other SELPAs, but they're also really trying to also model how the county offices and the SELPA should be working together in partnership to meet the needs of schools and districts. And so the Kern County Office of Education, as a geographic lead, has been working with its county offices and use the work that the system improvement leads have already been doing around data, using good data analysis and tools, as well as continuous improvement and improvement science, to talk about how exactly you can begin to integrate a lot of the special education, for example, state performance plan, annual performance review reports, so activities that are related to special education, and how they can actually use that along with performance data that's come from the dashboard to then think about, so what really should be our continuous improvement cycle? So the reality is they're trying to bring those different activities that typically have happened outside of DA or things like that and figure out how do we bring that together. And so the system improvement leads have been working with the counties within the Kern County geographic area to be able to really learn together and determine ways in which they can do that. Another highlight is the Shasta County Office of Education, and they've really been working on universal design for learning. But what's really interesting about their work is Northern California sometimes has desires to access things that are available throughout the state, such as professional learning and resources. But unfortunately, travel and staffing limitations makes it sometimes difficult for them to be able to access those same similar resources that are very good. It's just the ability to be able to access them. And so Shasta County Office of Education, as a geographic lead, has really worked with the Placer County Office, SELPA, who is our lead for Universal Design for Learning, and working together to say, how do we now create teams within the Northern California area, within these counties, that really could then be a support to districts and schools around Universal Design for Learning locally. So it's not this idea that constantly folks have to go out of their local area to be able to get good quality professional learning and resources, that they're building the capacity within their local area to be able to do that. So I think those are two good highlights to show how, even within our first year, I don't know about you, but when you're trying to launch new partnerships and collaboration is not easy. It's actually very hard to do. And so the fact that these county offices, again, I'm just highlighting two for you today, you're starting to see that people really see that how do we work together to be able to meet the needs of all students.
Carla?
Yes, please.
Can I just make a comment?
Please.
I appreciate you highlighting those two, and also on the slide that had the map. I appreciate you just showing us all of the different resources and supports that are being created. And we need a driver in all of this. We need somebody saying, look, here's what is included in the system of support, and really appreciate the leadership that you're bringing in that area. And I'll say yesterday we had the Department of Finance and we had a legislative committee that I participated in. And to hear a link between the way that the Department of Finance is thinking about funding programs, they talked about the statewide system of support. And so there was a linkage there. And then to see in legislation that is being proposed, there was a link there to the supports that you're giving this high-level overview of. So I just wanted to commend the work of the CCEE, specifically around just being a driver and keeping us informed about what the statewide supports look like.
Oh, thank you. It really is, like I said, folks are really understanding that our districts and schools need different things. And so people are really connecting in that area. I think always the details are the things that we're trying to figure out as a system. And so we're all working together with the same goal. And I think as I share with you, there's these glimmers of work that's already happened. Those that know me, I'm very about so what's the action behind purpose and vision? And so I think it's important to share with you as commissioners to see what the action looks like. And again, to give us some thoughts on that as we continue to think about next year's work. So regarding our SELPA leads, and just as a reminder, the special education resource leads, that's typically how they're identified, we call them the SELPA leads, focus directly on building special education local plan area capacity to support local educational agencies in achieving the goals, actions, and services identified in their local control and accountability plans. And so when the request for proposals was created for our SELPA leads, we wanted to make sure that we thought of leaders who could help support special education systems overall, such as data quality and continuous improvement, but also that there are certain content areas that folks are really struggling with and that we've seen within our state performance indicators that we're struggling with, that we want to make sure serve as a resource to other SELPAs as they work with their LEAs. And we wanted to make sure that it was really grounded in this idea of how do we ensure that our students are in the most least restrictive environment and that these things don't serve as barriers to keep our kids from being able to access their educational programs. So the system improvement leads, as I shared, is focused on data quality and literacy. And those folks are El Dorado SELPA, Riverside County SELPA, and the West San Gabriel Valley SELPA. Then we also have our SELPA content leads, who are Imperial County SELPA, who's focused on English language learners and students with disabilities. In particular, they use the recent guide that the CD has put out regarding how to meet the needs of ELL students with disabilities. We have Marin County SELPA, which is really focused on evidence-based practices, in particular for kids with autism. We have Placer County SELPA, who's focused on universal design for learning with a focus on ACT as well. So we've been able to have some really great work that the Placer County SELPA has been engaged in partnership. And then the South County SELPA, which is focused on disproportionality and areas of disproportionality related to suspension and performance and so on, and over-identification or under-identification. So the few that I'm going to highlight today, first, the South County SELPA, who's been very focused on disproportionality, has been really using a design thinking model for addressing an issue of equity, which is very different. When you think about the type of work they're doing, they're trying to build awareness, action, and then think about the scaling up of designs that folks have been able to create based on looking at the data, based on understanding issues of inequity and how our own structures perpetuate those issues of inequity. And so they have trained about 40 administrators, teachers, parents, and community members. They have both virtual as well as in person. So I think the other thing they've been really focused on is making sure that they create access opportunities for folks, not just locally, but also if they want to zoom in or be able to join virtually. I myself have also joined some of those, and I just wanted to give folks a link. There will be one tonight, for example, so if anybody wanted to join in on that one, they definitely can still register. But they have plenty of sessions that they're also making available. They're also working on creating a data tool. They are at the early stages of completing its development and now finding partners to be able to pilot the tool with. The tool is really looking at predictive analysis. How will they be able to know around issues of disproportionality? Who is at higher risk? So which students are at higher risk for being over-identified, under-identified, where you'll see issues of disproportionality around suspension. And so they're developing a tool to be able to create a little bit more predictiveness to which students are really struggling or not, and that way districts and SELPAs can really work towards making sure that they prevent that from happening. Again, they're at the beginning phases of this, and they've been partnering with the CDE and CEDAR systems to just be able to look at data together. The other one that I'd like to highlight today is the Placer County SELPA. They've been very focused on universal design for learning. I think the real neat thing here is they are up and ready to go. And so you can see that we have the link here for their open access materials. So they make their materials for universal design learning very public. They're building teams to be able to then build capacity within their local areas. And as I shared with you in Northern California, they've really have done a lot of great work in being able to do that already. And so they're looking at how do they scale that up and are looking for partners currently to be able to do that. They've also been partnering with CAST and other collaborative partners. So the one thing about universal design for learning that they found was that there's a lot of folks already in the state involved in that type of work. So what they decided to do is really create a coalition of folks who come together regularly to talk about what they're offering and making sure that what they've created or what they're providing is something that is not stepping on each other and also is really leveraging areas of need that folks have identified. I think the other cool thing beyond the coalition they've created has been that because of this coalition work and the work that the SELPA leads have been doing, California will be hosting the first international UDL summit here for the next 2 years. It'll be this April in San Francisco. And so I think they're really trying to show nationally as well how California is really trying to focus on implementation of universal design for learning. I think we'll be really excited to continue to see the type of coaching work as much as leadership work that this SELPA lead is showing. And again, resources are available.
Date for that in April?
No, I don't, but I will get it for us. Another group is our system improvement leads. Like I shared with you, they are more looking at the larger system itself. They have been doing some really great work in a couple of ways. One, they have launched their data tool, and I logged in to just, try it out myself. Their data tool that they've created is as I shared earlier, the partnership they have with Kern County, which served as their pilot. Their data tool is really trying to bring all these different special education activities that our districts have shared that, they know that are helpful and they do help inform some of the work that they're doing, but how does it intersect with other things is always the challenge. And so what they've been trying to do is with this tool that is moved beyond just pilot phase is how do you bring these kinds of reports? How do I create visual tools based on some of our state accountability reports in a way that makes it accessible to everybody so people can understand what a particular indicator means as it relates to other data, for example. And so they're very excited to be able to say that it's been launched. More resources and tools will end up there, more indicators, for example. They're working on adding more indicators that can then generate other reports. These can be really helpful for county offices and SELPAs as they're preparing for DA, for example. So as they're addressing performance issues, you can start to look at the underbelly of some of the compliance responsibilities that maybe also haven't been happening, and how do we address them at the same time. I think the other thing that I would just highlight is that they will be having their first SIL Summit, so their System Improvement Lead Summit. And that will be, I do have the date for that one, April 23rd in San Diego. And really, they will be focusing on continuous improvement. How do you look at continuous improvement through the lens of special education? And I think the other thing I would just say, I've put their website here. They have some amazing, really helpful tools from truly understanding state performance indicators and the state performance plan, as much as how do you look at improvement science through special education. And they even have webinars and modules that folks could use. And so I really encourage folks to take a look at those because they've done some really good work on the lift of putting all these ideas together and activities together so people can just log on and use them.
And we can send out those websites to the leads so that you guys can look at those and see what things you might want to, if you want to sign up for any of their trainings.
Yeah, and we also, I brought a handout for them because one of the slides is really small, and so I brought a handout for you guys so you can see it. These are just some of the partners that the system improvement leads have already been engaged with. Again, I just want to highlight that folks are not doing their work in silos. They're really trying to be intentional of creating partnerships with others to ensure that people really can serve all their students. So I will make sure that you get the handout, which basically summarizes each of the SELPA leads kind of role, and then also their website so you can take a look at what resources are already there. So the last thing I want to say is next steps. So although we are, Kristen, myself, and many of the others within the system of support are very focused on improving outcomes for students, as well as really taking action and not spending too much time thinking about things, but actually thinking about like how can we be responsive to what the data is showing us and that folks are sharing they need. Some reflections that we're already having are how do we leverage resources and direct support to LEAs? I think there's still a lot out there, but I don't know that folks necessarily know what's available and how to use it. And could we be even more intentional about how do you use data to knock on somebody's door and saying, hey, your data's showing this. We would suggest and encourage you to think about these resources locally available to you so you can actually access them. And I think the other thing is there's a lot of great talent within our system of support. We have our great equity leads, for example, Title III leads, our MTSS sums, community engagement, so many others. How do we also continue to build bridges like we've started with the counties and started to see some intersections? The disproportionality SELPA leads, for example, they worked with the equity leads in San Diego to as a partner, a thought partner in the equity conference that just occurred a month or so ago. And so, they're there working with them in partnership to address some of these other factors. So what are other opportunities that we could be leveraging more? And lastly, leveraging resource direct support to LEAs, also partnering directly to support more LEAs directly. So we know we're trying to scale up across California. California is a big place. But where can we start to show where the models, both from a county to the district, to the schools, to the classroom, where can we start to show how that works? What will it take for that to work within the system of support? We don't know quite yet. I think there's some positive bright spots, but we still have greater thinking to do about how to make sure that folks are getting that access. And so we look forward to reflecting on that more and learning from the places where we have been able to do that, as many of our SELPA leads have done that already. So we can really think about what does it need to happen for it to scale up, because scaling is really our next big phase. And with that, I say thank you. Hopefully not too quick, but enough so you know what's been going on. And if you have any questions or thoughts, I welcome them.
Commissioners, do you have any questions, comments? Sarah?
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
As a current SELPA director, I can, and as a longtime SELPA director, I can tell you that there's been a shift. There's been a real kind of a feeling difference in the work that we do. And I think for the longest time, it's always been a tough job.
Yes.
But when you're focused solely on compliance and you're kind of being told what you're doing wrong, that there's always, stuff that you are, need to fix. It's been a nice shift to really say, let's look at outcomes for kids. And I think that the leads have been great. I think their energy that they're bringing to this work has helped to kind of infuse the rest of the SELPA directors in kind of shifting to that outcome work and the creative side of our work. Often we don't get to be creative in our work. And so it's been a really exciting shift. So. And they're phenomenal. The amount of information they put out, and it's just been really great. So I want to commend you for that work.
I know they are working very hard and trying to be everywhere for everybody, but they are very excited to partner. I think the partner with the SELPA Association too has been a really great thing, that they've really worked hard to be able to do that, make sure that they're working with their partners within SELPA. So I appreciate that, Sarah.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and for you both who are new in this role today, we work in really close partnership between the department and the California Collaborative around this, particularly in this area of special education support. And one of the opportunities that it's allowed, as well as the SELPA leads have allowed, is for us to really have special education in the conversation. And so the SELPA leads are really part of the work that's happening around the regions of the state with the geographic leads. So where opportunities are shared for special ed and general ed to come together and really speak each other's language and see where the commonalities are and how they can inform each other. So this is fairly new. It's a little bit in its infancy in terms of it's really in the first major year of implementation. And I think if we could be proud parents, Carla, around what they've really accomplished, because they have taken sort of a pipe dream and really made something of it in the state. So thank you for those comments, Sarah. I totally second that in terms of how things feel like they're shifting around the conversations. It's not just about checking the boxes. It's really about how we can make sure the outcomes are better.
Christine?
Sorry, I'm just going to flaunt my ignorance because I'm really good at this. So one of the things, I wanted to say this is exciting. This is really neat to see that how much is being, how many resources are put into helping our students in all these different ways. And one of the things when I was reflecting on yesterday's discussions, and I was thinking, how are we training the teachers to do all the things that we want them to do for our kids? So this is exciting to see that this is part of that. And I just had a question because because I'm new to this, I just was wondering why the groups are separated out into, I guess, the 4 main contents. Like, why? I understand if it's just it's easier, I guess. Is that what's going on? Like, why you're separating out, and then these groups are responsible for different content, and then they go out and train, as opposed to like maybe having those 5 areas, and each one becomes up to speed on each particular content area.
Yeah, it can be, it wasn't because it was easier, but more from a strategy lens that when we look at some of those areas, how do we ensure that there are unique resources to address each of those pieces? Because districts are struggling and different places need different types of support. SELPAs need different types of resources depending on the type of topic. So we wanted to make sure that people really got deep, because these are all things too that from the ELL Students with Disability Guide, for example, that the CDE put out. It is a perfect example that nationally a lot of places don't have something like that. So it's awesome that we have that, right? But to your point about implementation, that's just staying on the shallow end to have a guide. We need to go deep. How do you actually implement? So if we don't have folks who are able to really go deep, spend the time to really think about what are the barriers, what are the opportunities, then we're not able to really see implementation to the depth we need to. But to your point, though, that's kind of our next step. There's a real opportunity to be able to now show people how these things begin to intersect. And I'll give you an example. Another one of our SELPA leads, which is very awesome as well, is our Marin County SELPA, which consists of our captain folks who across the state have been focused on evidence-based practices for kids with autism. So they partnered with the ELL Students with Disabilities group to create their resource of what does the evidence-based practices look like in alignment to the ELL Students with Disabilities best practices. Where are those in alignment? That they're not something different, but they can actually really work with each other. So as teachers are thinking about implementing, they don't feel like, am I really meeting EL needs for my kids? When in reality, they actually could be with some evidence-based practices for kids with autism. That's our start. We'd like to see more of that kind of intersectionality now that folks have had some time to get deeper. I think they still, there's modules, for example, things that they want to make more available, but I think we really have an opportunity to begin to go, those intersections start to show.
Real deep expertise.
Yes.
And then working.
So that was our strategy. I think it's, again, it was only because we've seen around UDL, for example, Universal Design for Learning, we've known that that is an excellent way for all kids to learn. But how many places are actually implementing in a very deep way? Very limited. And so we really need to go deeper, because there are reasons. It's not that people don't want to. It's really hard to figure out how to do. I hope that helps.
Exciting. Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Michelle?
So I looked up the conference dates are the 7th through the 9th in Burlingame. Just
Oh,
in case
thank
anybody
you.
can go there. I'm pretty sure that's LA Unified spring break, so that's kind of good news. And I just think it's amazing what you've done in 1 year. It's mind-blowing to me. I'm actually feeling really excited. I put your presentation in my thing to take home with me so I can look up some more about it.
They're working hard. Folks are really definitely trying. Thank you. We got a lot of work to do, but we're definitely trying.
I was thinking while you were talking and pondering a lot of different thoughts, actually. And one of the goals I set for myself when I thought about trying to step into Gina's shoes as chair of this commission was, what would I bring to it? What could I add to the conversation? And I was thinking that as a working elementary school principal, it's always a curious experience for me to come here and see all of this incredibly hard work and that so many people are doing, and great information, and it informs me personally. But it's just still an enormous challenge to actually inform the principal. And then, following up on what Sarah said, for SELPA directors and for the people that are trying to disseminate a lot of this hard work, their message ends up being grouped with a lot of other messages that are communicated to principals at the same time. So it ends up just becoming part of a global noise of job tasks, as opposed to a really focused conversation of of your ability to access all of the hard work that so many people are doing, right? So I think to myself, on any given day, I'm thinking of the safety requirements. I'm thinking of parent engagement. I'm thinking of special ed. I'm thinking of curricular issues. The parking lot, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And so I just feel like there's still this gap or divide between so many people's efforts and then the results of so many people's efforts and the actual functional communication down to someone that's managing a school site. And that still makes me feel like there's a lot of conversation I need to be adding to that, because I'm the person that's managing the school site. And it's not for lack of effort from everyone else, and it's not for lack of information being available. It's almost like there's too much information available. And how do I find, every time I see someone have a one-page tear sheet, I'm like, can I have that? Can I have that? Can I just put that in a sheet protector and keep it in the little binder by my desk? So I would love to know your thoughts on that. I'm only being indulgent to this point of view of mine because we have a little time, and I thought, well, I'm just going to insert myself a little.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, Christine, it wasn't a newcomer question. I mean, I have the same question, and I've been doing this for a long time. It's really exciting to see the work that people are doing. And I recall there was some survey that, and Krista, maybe you remember, but there was some survey that said that is the problem. That's where it's like there's this break in the circuit. And what are your thoughts, or what could we do to like close that circuit a little bit better? Because people trying to talk to site administrators, they all have good information, but every single group has the same information, and the time that they have with site principals is so limited that they all deliver it in the same moment. And so is it possibly that we need more time? But how do you find more time? I mean, that's the question. So I'd love to know your thoughts on if you see that circuit break and if anyone's talking about that.
Yeah, no, so that's part of what I was sharing with you of we have a lot of great resources now that folks have developed or continue to refine. Folks are getting the feedback, what works, what doesn't. This is what we really need kind of stuff. So, which is good. What we'd hate is folks start coming to knock on our door and we're not ready to meet the need. That would not be good. So I think that part is moving in the right direction. I think in our next steps, the real question is how do we make sure that we're also looking at it in two ways. One, how do we use data to be much more intentional about informing people of things that are available to them to help address some of them? Some menu of options doesn't mean that you only get one option, but that based on your data and these areas that you're struggling, that you know what's available to you. And I think that is one way that I think we could be better. And that's one of the things I'm wondering, how could we be better? The second piece is that I think also as the system of support, we have to figure out what is the thing that we need to offer all year long to everybody, because it's just good stuff that folks need to know. And what are those things? I think we need to talk more to schools and our teachers and so on to figure out what are the things you just need. I'm going to bring one up. I'm not because anyone's validated it, but it's one thing I think of is like literacy. Literacy, how do you ensure that you're able to ensure that students with disabilities, for example, access literacy? How do you do that for ELs? Things like that. All year long, new teachers, veteran teachers, there's always a need to be able to continue to improve in those areas because their kids constantly change, and so we've got to be able to adapt to those changing classrooms. But what are some of those things that really we may not offer as much, but are very intentional to address certain things that we're seeing in the data? So for example, around our state performance indicators, Kristen's been great to constantly share that with us and let us know where we're stagnant. And so as I look at, for example, achievement of our African-American students, as well as African-American students or students with disabilities, that data and achievement, we've got work to do. So what should we be offering that's very unique, especially for certain districts, for example, that I support who have large numbers of students who fit in both of those different student groups, and yet do they have all the resources and tools that they need to be able to continue to address, whether it's communities and schools or whatever it may be? Again, I think our schools and our teachers can better inform us on what those things are. But that's very unique to a particular place. Like I went to Northern California, and they were sharing with me, the counties and SELPAs up there were sharing with me about behavioral health, mental health, social emotional needs. How do you do that addressing poverty? That's something they're really struggling with. And so could we offer things that are very unique for that? And so those are just some of my initial thoughts. Again, I'm just thinking from the way from working in schools to working now in this type of role that I think we got to get really good at, some large number of things and then pick a couple things that we go really deep to build capacity and based on the local areas need. That would be my thoughts.
I agree. What I didn't say, I agree with Sarah that it does feel like it is shifting. I mean, I feel that too, that it's less about checking boxes. There was a frantic nature to things about 15 years ago. Make sure you do this, make sure you do this, make sure you do this. Like you just were just tied up in knots. And so that's how you approached all this work. And I think it'll take us a while to recover from that. Yeah. At the same time, I don't want to recover to where we drop the good practices that we developed from feeling like that. I still think that we need to make sure everyone adheres to what is an IEP team, and all of the rules that we learned that everybody, we were all so frantic. I mean, we want to make sure we don't drop that, but that we learn to look outside to the work that these county offices of ed and SELPAs are doing to answer the questions that we have. And I love the idea of focusing on one or two things and becoming expert in those one or two things. And then moving on from that, because it can feel like when you're trying to manage a school, it can feel like a ping pong, kind of everywhere. And then depending upon the needs of your school, you're only going to take what is effective for you.
And you only have a small amount of professional learning time or collaboration.
So small.
And so on. So, yeah.
Right. So small. Any other comments? Thank you for indulging me there for a minute.
I think, teachers just don't have a lot of time to be able to practice, implement, reflect, practice, implement, reflect. And so I think any way we can find time to do that, and then we can bring some experts in to support that would be the most helpful steps for that kind of boots on the ground level that we're talking about, because principals, I think they have the hardest job in the world, to be honest. That it's hard unless you've seen it up close and personal to understand how many things that they have to pay attention to and deal with, and the context that they shift like from second to second in their day, and then to expect them to also be the instructional leader on something new and ensure its implementation and make sure teachers know what to do with that on a day-to-day basis. It's why it doesn't happen. And so I think if we can really pay attention to the reality that there's going to be dollars behind some meaningful professional development that involves follow-up and coaching, instead of kind of like, we showed it to you and now do it, teachers will walk away from that for sure. So I'd rather see a slow implementation over a year of a couple of really great strategies with follow-up to help teachers kind of develop their professional learning, cooperative learning network to be able to support each other in it, but it takes time for that. So.
One model that I've found, that I've been in 4 schools and that's worked for me, and I really didn't identify it as a model, it was mostly just survival, but it's a people-driven business that we're in. Yes. And so I would always look for, what are the shining stars in this new environment, this new community that I'm in? What can I highlight? And then when you find them and when you highlight them, and then you have enough information such as you're providing to be able to say to these people that have just landed on something great that they're sort of just figuring out for themselves as they go, but then you back them up with, this is actually what you're doing. You're doing a UDL practice or you're doing an MTSS practice, and here's this group of people that are like-minded like you, and here's this source of information that you can go further on that. You end up from a management standpoint, you end up inspiring at least those receptive around them that want that information. And then you see that pocket just kind of expand out, like, the ripples from a pebble in a pond. And because you can't mandate anything, you just can't, it won't work. But you can get incremental growth. What's made me sad with that model is, those people that I have maintained relationships with at schools where I've worked and then I've moved on, it will go away with a principal. I mean, we established at one school an amazing MTSS program. It was every student was differentiated for every single day. And when I left, they put a rather new principal in who just didn't have that skill set to keep it going. And it was gone in 3 months. And so you think that you've changed a culture, but often you haven't changed a culture. Often it's your leadership that's changing that culture. And so we have to be able to sort of also train principals to find your area of leadership and then do whatever you can to get it to have enough life that maybe it will sustain after you go. And it's great if it does, but sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes it's about you continuing to drive it. But supporting whatever little inspirations and pockets of greatness that you can find with outside sources like you've identified at least can keep those people connected to other like-minded people, and the work can move forward, cross fingers.
Well, and we do have an opportunity with our Educator Workforce Investment Grant, as well as our 21st Century CSLA grant that is currently out there looking for applicants, because I think that's exactly where, remember what I was saying, like, what do we want to offer throughout to everybody, and what do we want to make sure that there's certain things that we can get really deep in, because implementation is difficult. And so I think that there's some opportunities there. I really want to also focus on what Michelle said about the coaching and implementation. I think that's one of the things that we have to be really careful about, that if they're not included, this idea of coaching for implementation, this is where you're not going to see, you're going to get understanding grow, but how you actually make it happen day in, day out in a classroom, school, or district becomes much harder to be able to do if you haven't had some practice and some coaching with that. So my hope is with the EWIG work, which is one Chris and I are both on as well, that we can find partners who are really understand that model of learning is essential if we're going to make sure that it really gets seeded into the work. So, but there's some opportunities before us. I think the hard part is always making sure we stay focused on what we know works. And that's the hard work for us to think about, make sure we do that.
Nadine?
I was just going to make a suggestion, is also perhaps tapping into the other departments, not just the teachers, like the paraprofessionals and the related services, to be on board, and also what they need to be able to help the teachers and the school. Just overall, what you were saying, Summer, about the whole climate and the culture, I think starts from the top, but also buying in. I think if you have one of those, if you have a paraprofessional who's buying in, knows the strategies, then you'll have better outcomes. So that would be the suggestion.
No, that's great. And I did mention in EWIG for the Educator Workforce Investment Grant, correct me if I'm wrong, it includes paraeducators, which is really awesome. So I think folks are recognizing that. And so it's, again, my hope is next time we come, we have more examples that we can show you how this continues to grow. We're trying to remain really focused to make sure that we do it really with fidelity and well.
Are there any public comments, Erin? Well, Carla, thank you so much. It really is so impressive to see what so many people are doing. And I like that even though we need to integrate it all, you really can't do everything all at once. So being able to look to this area for working on UDL, this area for working on literacy, this area for working on disproportionality, at least we're growing a set of experts that other people can draw upon, and hopefully we'll all become better knowledgeable for it. So thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for having me, Commissioners.
We're a little ahead of time. Why don't we take a 5 or 10 minute break, and then we'll catch back up so we can be ready for item 12. Thanks. Thank you, Commissioners. We got ourselves a nice little morning break there, and we caught up in time. We're going to move on to item number 12, which is a presentation from Jeff Kramer about AB 2657, and Shiloh will join him. And we thank you so much for coming to us today. I know that I'm in your work group, but we've never met because I was on the telephone conference call. So nice to meet you in person. Look forward to your information.
Thank you very much. Well, can you hear me? This is a new experience to be here, so I want to make sure that you can hear me. So my name is Jeff Kramer, and I've been with the department for 4 months, 13 days, and 2 hours. I just flew in last night from the equity conference and got in late, and so my ears are still plugged, and I'm very dehydrated from having stayed in a hotel for 4 nights. So if any of you have had that experience, you know where I'm at. So I will be taking drinks of water from time to time just because I can tell I'm getting dry mouth. So before I came on board to the department, I have about 25 years of experience working with students with severe behavior challenges. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. Most of my work has been here in Sacramento County. I've worked for 2 large school districts, and I've worked in families' homes for about 7 years, helping families with children either with autism or experiencing behavior challenges. My last assignment was with a school district east of here, where I was fortunate enough for 11 years to oversee the behavior program development as well as mental health, and I oversaw the restraint crises policy and procedures and training program. And so this particular statute is close to my professional expertise, but also my passion in working with kids and knowing that there can be success with kids who are experiencing challenging behavior, and that we can help the education system and families. And I also have been certified in 3 of the different restraint de-escalation curriculum. And so that gives you a little basis of where I come from given this new assignment. So I am here to talk to you a little bit about Assembly Bill 2657, which now we refer to as really the restraint seclusion statute. It is housed in the general ed section under pupil discipline, section 4905 through 4906.4 in the California Education Code. The statute applies to all students, not just students with special ed. Pupil discipline, restraint, seclusion, I'm going to hit a couple of key points. It does not change other laws. Some of you may be aware of behavioral intervention section in the special ed side of ed code. That's the piece I've been working with probably since, maybe 2013, when the Assembly Bill 86 trailer bill occurred, removing Hughes bill. And I was very comfortable with Hughes bill, having worked with another school district. So I've kind of gone through that journey. I met with various people as we saw a chain of events occurring in the community, and was, displayed in the media, and brought serious alarm to everybody, realizing that restraint or seclusion might even be used with students. And so I followed that very closely before arriving here, and really kind of thought that through as to how it related to Hughes bill, behavioral interventions, and now the restraint seclusion, because this has really been kind of a long process over probably 30 years. So it's not really entirely new. The 3 buckets of restraint seclusion are that the law provides definitions, and it hits on some prohibitive practices as well. It also it applies to all students, and that's new. The third part is data collection and reporting requirements, which Shiloh and her team have been working on for over a year. And those are really kind of the key areas of the statute. However, in looking at the statute and having come from the field, there's a tremendous amount of information there that needs to kind of be explored and discussed, and we might be looking at how we can provide some guidance to the field to bring understanding. I pulled a few sections from the legislative intent of restraint seclusion, and they're meaningful to me. They help me ground myself as I work with different people to remind them what's important here. I think while the statute allows restraint or seclusion to be used, we do have to recognize that those are very restrictive, complicated interventions that get used in the field, and that they present great risk if not done correctly And our whole goal as educators, if we're working with students with challenging behavior, is to reduce risk. We want to be using techniques that reduce risk. So it's important to recognize that when we get more restrictive in the continuum of what we might have to make a decision in working with a young person, is that with more complicated interventions, we also bring risk. So it should be always in our mind that we should be looking at the most safe measures first, and really making sure that staff are highly trained and feel confident in safety measures so that they don't have to necessarily cross that or travel that continuum. There's no evidence that restraint or seclusion can be used as an intervention to change behavior. Restraint or seclusion is not going to teach my 3 children at home how to use the piano better, to be more effective readers, to form friends, to have a passion for education. They don't teach. So we have to get a message across that it's going to be very important that folks realize that restraint or seclusion have extreme limits in promoting being a learner. And we want to make sure that folks realize that restraint and seclusion is not going to teach a kid to be a different learner the next day at school. Students with disabilities and students of color are disproportionately subject to restraint or seclusion. Kent McIntosh at the University of Oregon is doing extensive work in the particular area of disproportionate use of discipline. And while I don't want to speak specific or to great detail about that particular area, it's that we have to recognize that staff, maybe educators, had not realized that restraint and seclusion were being used more frequently with certain groups of students within the education system. And then, of course, the intent of the legislation is to ensure learning in safe and healthy environments, and to make sure that we're providing adequate safeguards. And so those were some of the areas that ground me. The use of restraint or seclusion is a big deal, and it shouldn't be a part of just a normal part of a school day. In 1995, I was given the opportunity to develop a parent participation preschool for children with autism. It was my classroom. I was the teacher. And I met a little boy named Joey. And Joey, I can tell you right now, I can't remember the name of any student that I've ever had to help a team with a restraint. But Joey, I'll never forget Joey, because Joey would come to school and he had some of the classic autism characteristics. He would carry his little toys into class. He had this big, beautiful smile. He was so happy to be at school. On the other side, Joey also presented that he could use his size to knock over other kids and hurt them and cause them to cry or to have injuries. He could probably knock over some of the staff. He would flip over desks. And naively, I thought restraint was a way to address working with Joey. And while I had a tremendous amount of book smarts, I had very little practical smarts. And I chose to put Joey in a small child hold. And Joey was echoleic. And one of the things that I learned during that time with him was, one, I was not prepared for what I had made a decision to do. Two, that I didn't have an exit plan if I realized in that moment. I was going to keep Joey and me safe. I knew that. I was going through tremendous emotional feelings myself. But Joey's echolalia suddenly went on the rise, and Joey started to talk about how he didn't feel good. He wasn't happy anymore. But he also started to tell me that he didn't think that I liked him. And that was really a major crossroad. And the reason I share that story with you now is because for 16 years, I've been a trainer out there. And I've supervised for 11 years an entire team that was supervising. And if there was a training, I was always at that training, and I reminded all the staff about my experience with Joey and really encouraged them to take that moment to make a choice that after we had trained them, that they wouldn't use restraint, that they would be mindful that just because you've received training in a particular area doesn't mean that it's the right thing to go do. It might just be a requirement of your job, might be part of your job description. Your employer might think that it's what you need to be trained in. But at the end of the day, when you're faced with that moment of severe challenging behavior, you have a lot of other choices that we want you to consider first. Best practices, leadership involvement. I heard that in the earlier presentation about the importance of principals. We all realize they have the toughest job, but they have to be involved. Clear policy and procedures and guidelines. 3 days before I took on my new assignment, I was at a charter school where 4 staff were faced with a 12-year-old who wanted to run into the street. When we got everybody calm, we went into the room, we debriefed. The staff said, we're all CPI trained to do restraint, but we're scared because we think the parent's going to sue us, or we don't know what to do if the student runs in the street. What would you do? That was their question to me. And I realized that they don't have policy and procedure and guidelines that are tied to their training, and they're not getting that supervision to help them understand what decisions they face when working with students with severe behavior. Supportive supervision. 3 things have been found with supportive supervision. When staff feel they're supported, they're less likely to use restraint or seclusion. They're more likely to learn the predictive behaviors of the student who's going into crises and to prevent them and support them so that the restrictive techniques don't have to be used, and staff have less stress. Training is an essential element, specialized training depending on the group you're working with, and documentation of the event that is reliable and accurate at the point in which the intervention was used is critical, because it can be used for decision-making within the leadership, the supportive structure, and the individuals who are certified in the techniques that they might be trained in. So we've put together an ad hoc work group. We've had our first Zoom meeting a couple of weeks ago. The group was very active, had a lot of input. We've set the foundation for future meetings. Our next meeting will be with them in person next Thursday. There's about 40-some individuals from across the state that are participating. It's made up of a collective group that I think will provide us tremendous guidance in looking at maybe an 8+ page guidance resource. We've looked at other states that have developed a resource that we think would be very useful to give some parameters to school principals, vice principals, district office staff to have greater understanding of what this statute means and what it doesn't mean. It would address things like equitable prevention practice supports and intervention. What I think of when I think of equitable is that the interventions are known to be effective, that they are available to all students, that they produce meaningful outcomes, that kids are going to benefit from them. Might look at training standards, documentation, and data use, parent, guardian support. When I was at the equity conference the last couple of days, I took liberty each time I got to introduce the speakers that I was responsible to set them up for their training, and I let the group know I'm looking for anything to learn more of how to help families, because I think we have to have that partnership with them in how we do intervention. Identify existing practices and use by LEAs, and that includes non-public schools, charters, etc. Presentation topics, existing statutes and guidance documents, definitions and prohibited practices, alternatives to restraint and seclusion. The PBIS Coalition Group had presented at the Equity Conference. To my surprise, they showed that schools that are doing universal Tier 1 PBIS showed a 68% reduction in more restrictive interventions for students with special needs. And so I immediately tapped those people and said, we got to go get that bullet, and we're going to really examine how we start talking about effective alternatives. We're looking at standards for training staff in crises de-escalation. That has been my favorite work the last 10 years, is working with people in the public, in schools, on diffusion technique. It's amazing how quickly we see people all around us in the workplace, the community, our neighbors. They get upset, they start to breathe rapidly, their brain function narrows to 5%, it's observable, they're unable to hear information, right? Think about being a teacher who never had been trained in 1995, is faced with a kid, and I can assure you I was equally in as much crises as he was. And my brain function was 5%, right? I see it in people I work with all the time. They just get excited, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we're in a diffusion situation. What technique do I use? Thank goodness for Joey, right? Creating positive behavioral systems, supporting all students' safeguards. So we looked at the data from the work group in the Zoom meeting. This is one sample. As a good behavior analyst, I know I need 3 samples of data to see if I establish a trend. But right now I have 1 sample. It's the best one I have. Interestingly, the group spent a lot of time chattering about data collection and use. I'm not surprised. The earlier presenters had spoken about the importance of that information, training standards, and where is general ed function in this piece of the new statute. So those were 3. I think in the future meetings, we'll be paying attention to the same chatter and what they're talking about, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to present 3 forms of data so that we can see, do we have a trend, right? Do we have a law in nature amongst educators, advocates, parents who say, these are really the 3 areas we think need to be addressed the most. Naturally, you might say alternatives to intervention, de-escalation, parents, preventative practices. However, if you look at the other 3 areas that they did name, if we do those really well, we actually address the rest. So in some ways, they could see things that were very important that might have the greatest benefit given the new statute. The other piece is, we could also say that it's a result of all the work in 15 years around multi-tiered systems of support, PBIS, that staff are really learning that using data in the immediate moment is very critical. That it's the point. If I use my phone, which I left up, I have my phone. If I need to figure out how to get to the Department of Ed from my home, I can rapidly get that information to make rapid decisions in the moment. If I'm working at a school or a large district with 20 elementaries, 3 middle schools, and 2 high schools, and restraint or seclusion are being used, if I can't get that data for 12 or 14 months, that's irrelevant. That data does not hold any help for me to make decisions of how to help that kid or that team the next week. So we're learning that having data in the immediate moment is very critical. We have a set of trainings coming up. We've partnered with a group in which you'll see here different links that you can join and follow us in training, where we're making sure that we get a message across to folks in the state that 2657 is now in statute, that restraint or seclusion are serious, and then here are some training areas. At the bottom of Review Existing Resources is our Padlet site. You can see that we've been uploading meaningful information for the stakeholders to follow and to have access to. You're welcome to check that Padlet site and see what kind of information is there. I would encourage you to look at PBIS from the OSEP site at pbis.org and look at how researchers have pointed out how we can reduce restraint or seclusion in schools. And then here's my email address if you have other questions or you have somebody who wants to learn more about the work we're doing. Ms. Shiloh?
And while Shiloh's coming up, I'll just say that that I think you'd probably agree that it was a great coup getting Jeff to come on board here. It's no easy task getting anyone on board in general, but the fact that he was willing to come over to the department to really do this statewide work has been great, and having someone with that his background and experience is really valuable for us, especially right now while we're really digging in to train the state. So he's only been here for a few months, so kudos for what he's done so far, and I hope you'll see him as a statewide resource. We certainly do.
I'm honored to be a part of this team. Thank you.
Well, good morning, commissioners. 2 times in 2 days. It's like amazing to see your faces again. I was joking with Gina. It's like I had to be TV ready 2 days in a row. That's not easy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what we do know, some of what we don't know in terms of the data for these events, and then what we will be collecting so that we can have a better understanding of what's happening throughout the state. So this data has been collected traditionally in the Office of Civil Rights Data Collection, which is reported directly from schools to the U.S. Department of Education. And so we have like no direct access to the submission itself, unlike CalPADS that comes to us, and then we submit data to the U.S. Department of Education. So we only have the data that comes afterwards, and so and the data is in arrears. So the most current data we have is 15-16 data from the Office of Civil Rights, and it identified in California that there were 3,830 instances of restraint and seclusion for students with disabilities, 68 instances of restraint and seclusion for students with 504 plans, and 838 instances of restraint and seclusion for students without IEPs or 504 plans. If you think about it, we have 6 million public education students, 800,000 students with disabilities. If you were to go by this data, you would think, well, this seems like to be a very small problem comparatively. However, recently the Government Accountability Office published a report about this specific data collection and really admonished the U.S. Department of Education because they accused the U.S. Department of Education of knowingly collecting false data. And the reason they put that in there is because so many schools across the country, large and small, had reported 0 instances. And they didn't believe that was possible given the population. And so I know the U.S. Department of Education is looking more closely at this, but I think we are going to be able to collect data in a much more rigorous way. The other thing that data is not collected for in the Office of Civil Rights data collection is in instances of restraint and seclusion that happen at non-public schools. So that is actually not reported at all to the Office of Civil Rights. And that's something that's different between what's reported to the Office of Civil Rights and what will be reported to us. So now this is very small, but this is actually just straight from the law. And so the AB 2657 requires that districts report annually to us instances and students. So the number of times restraint and seclusion occurs and the number of students for whom it occurs. And it's for students very similar to the Office of Civil Rights data collection, where you have students who are on IEPs, students on 504 plans, and students who are not on either of those types of plans. So that's the collection requirements. We have to publish that data 3 months after it's received to us. So once we receive it, we have 3 months then to publish it on our website. And so this year, 2019-20, will be the first year that we're collecting that data. So let's talk a little bit about how this data is going to be collected. We are going to be collecting it in CalPADS, and we are going to be collecting it at the student level. And so it's kind of important to note that had we required it to be collected at the aggregate level, we would have had to create a new data collection, and we were not willing to do that. That's typically pretty onerous on both the CD and on school districts to create a new data collection, to submit data in a different way. This data can come up already in CalPADS, and most student information systems where this data is housed already collects this data at the individual student level. So we will be collecting this data in the end of year 3 collection in CalPADS. And that was typically known as the suspension expulsion file. And now it is our incident reporting system. And so the student discipline file has now been split into 3 different files for this collection. You have the student incident, the incident result, and the student offense. And so we will be able to collect instances of suspension, expulsion, restraint, seclusion, referrals to law enforcement, and school arrest. So we will now be able to collect an array of different types of incidences that occur. So end of year 3 is every instance that occurs between July 1 and June 30th of the academic year. So LEAs are already collecting this locally as of July 1, and we have already been training them to do that. So we published the file specifications for this, I believe in the fall, to collect this at the end of year. And it is all the instances for the academic year. It's a cumulative count. And it's going to be required to be certified at the end of August annually. The date changes a little bit. I think it's August 24th this year. I'll have to look more closely at that. But what happens is the collection closes as of June 30th, and then we give time for LEAs to be able to ensure that the data doesn't have any errors in it. So this is basically what it's going to look like. You'll have an incident that occurs, and that incident has a date associated with it and an ID that's associated with it. And the local LEA can create its own ID for this incident, but it has to be unique. And then it's associated with the date. And then within that incident file, you have the LEA has to determine, did that incident have an offense associated with that was a 48900 or 48915 violation? If it did, yes, then the LEA has to report the SSID and then the offense code and name that was associated with that student that was involved in the offense or in the incident. So what that does is it helps us identify all the different types of incidences and all the different offenses that a student might violate in terms of having a suspension or a school-related arrest. But there might be instances where there is no violation of a 48900 or a 48915 education code, in which they can also just report that maybe a restraint or a seclusion occurred. So some people have been under the misimpression that you have to commit a 48900 or 48915 violation in order to report a restraint and seclusion. That is not the case. You can report the incident, you can report no 48900, 48915 violations, and report the outcome, the disposition, which would be a restraint or seclusion. And so you can see that that's in that third table here, where it shows, for example, for incident 1, there was an incident that occurred. It did have a 48900 violation associated with it. There was a restraint and there was a suspension. However, incident 2 did not have a 48900, so you'll not see the offenses associated with the 48900 violation, but you will see the disposition, which is the restraint that occurred. So you can see we are being able to collect a really wide array of data associated with restraints, seclusions, and other types of disciplinary actions as well. So in the past, for the suspension file, local education agencies only could submit the final result. So, for example, if you had a student who had an in-school suspension and then an out-of-school suspension and then an expulsion, only the expulsion would be reported. And so we really changed that so all the different types of disciplinary actions and dispositions can be reported. Also, if a student experiences both a restraint and a seclusion, both of those can be reported. So they don't have to make a decision about those elements. And then they have to have an incident result, but not a student offense result, which I kind of already talked about that. We also added a number of new incident result codes. We used to only have out-of-school suspension, in-school suspension, I am so sorry, and expulsion, but we've also added other types, other means of correction, no action, physical restraint, mechanical restraint, seclusion, school-related arrest, and a law enforcement referral. So these are all the new incident result codes, and they do, as of July 1, should be existing inside the student information systems. Keep in mind, data collected for all of these incidences are not collected in the special education data systems like SACE. They are collected in the student information system, and it's been that way for almost 4 years. We used to collect that data in CASEMIS, but we stopped collecting that data in CASEMIS in 2005, and we've only been collecting that data in CalPADS. So this will be a CalPADS collection that comes from the student information system. It's also worth noting that AB 2657 is not a special education law. It is a law that applies to all students. And so this data should be tracked for all students, not just students with disabilities. Yes, Gina?
I have a quick question. Thank you for all this information. It is very exciting. Will the guidance that is created by the work group include a definition for what is included in a restraint?
That I can't answer for you. I think one of the things that we have to kind of consider is there is a definition for mechanical and physical restraint that exists in the law, and that is part of the current regulation. And so stepping further outside of that may require, I think, a legislative change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I'm just thinking about how exciting this is and the training from getting from here all the way down to trickle down to the school sites and then out to the non-public schools so that the data is reported consistently. I don't envy your role. I'm trying to figure that out.
So I will tell you, we are receiving a number of questions from LEAs. And so we're working on an FAQ that should probably come out within the next month or so. The data collection for this will open probably in mid-April for submission to CDE. And so we're trying to get out a set of FAQs prior to that. And we will be doing some trainings via webinars and other types of trainings as well. But one of the biggest things that I think folks at the LEA level need to consider is that they should have policies, local policies and procedures in place about what they do. And so there's a lot of questions that come to us, and our response is, this is the law. What are your local policies and procedures? And so that's, I think, really important and something that LEA should consider.
In the description of the mechanical restraints, are there examples that are listed in there, or is it more theoretical of what it looks like?
I think it's neither. There are no examples, but I don't think it's very theoretical. It does say, that I don't have it right in front of me, but it talks about the student, the file specifications are also here if anybody wanted to look at them. I know that's super exciting for folks to go to the CalPADS website. But it does provide a definition saying that it's a mechanical restraint is typically something that not a seatbelt, but something that's keeps the child from moving their arms and legs. So there is some of that definition, but we've had questions that have gone a little bit further, like, how often do we report restraint and seclusion? If it happens within a time period, there is some specification around if a law enforcement official uses handcuffs, that's not considered a mechanical restraint to be reported under this law. So there's those kinds of delineations within the law, but there's things that also need to be delineated within the local policies and procedures.
In the local policies and procedures, it would be great for them to maybe outline what are those acceptable mechanical restraints that they're agreeing about, so that we're all on the same page in a lot of ways. So,
yeah, I also think there should be what do we do in an incident?
Mm-hmm.
How do we capture it? What do we do? What is the process? So that everybody's doing the same. Because that's one of the things that typically happens, and that's problematic around data collection, is when you have high levels of variability because every person is interpreting things differently. And so if you have a local policy procedures that says, this is our interpretation of this, we have consulted legal counsel, this is what we say this is, and so this is how it is to be implemented, and this is how it is to be reported.
I'm not sure if this is a silly question, but is there a way that we can ensure that LEAs will report instances of restraints?
So obviously we will be looking at, if a district has 10 students and they report 0, that might have occurred. If a district has 10,000 students and they report 0, that would probably raise some red flags to us. So we'll be looking at districts who submit no data and asking those questions. This is going to take time for folks to understand the data collection and the requirements. So we expect there will be some variability, at least in year 1, as we continue to refine and train folks on how they should be reporting it.
Hi, Shiloh. In terms of the final result and not doing that, so if you have a student who is suspended pending expulsion,
yes,
it's going to show up as separate incidents for that student?
It'll show up as one incident with separate dispositions. So for example, you could have incident, I'm looking here, so you could have like incident 1 could show suspension and then expulsion.
And so how does that data going to impact the district looking at their rates of suspension or expulsion? So typically that would be a student who would just show up on your expulsion list, right? So now you're going to, because you can't just expel, you have to suspend prior to expulsion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of that process. So now is it going to be you're increasing so your suspension rates are going to look actually higher?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes, they will look higher. So, and that would probably likely be reflected on the dashboard, although we haven't had those conversations quite yet around what that data looks like. We don't even know what it looks like yet with the Accountability Office. I'm sure we will be having those conversations as it comes through in the fall.
So what is the kind of the rationale for not just doing a final disposition?
So there's a couple reasons for that. One has to do with the requirements under IDEA to calculate the number of days. And so for many LEAs, those suspension days were not being counted. And then if there was an in-school suspension and then an out-of-school suspension, the in-school suspension was not being counted towards the days. And so we weren't getting as accurate data in terms of the number of days a student was suspended or expelled. And we know that even students who are suspended or expelled still have to be provided services, so they need to be provided their services potentially in an alternative environment.
Christine?
I guess a follow-up to Havanya's question about how do we know they're reporting it? Is this going to be publicly available information so that, like, let's say a parent is like, why is my kid's incident not on there? I know this happened. You know, just sort of some accountability to the public, at least a check-in, and for parents to also see, you know, what's happening at this school or that school.
So we will be publishing this data publicly, and it will be on our website, but it will not be at the student level. So we have to ensure that we're complying with FERPA, so it will be at the aggregate level, but we will not be publishing actual students who are.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean like individuals, but would it be like by district? Or?
By district and potentially by school. So we'll be looking at it more closely when we have the data. Thank you. The one also thing that should be noted is that we are also requiring this data to be submitted to us about incidences that occur at non-public schools.
Any other questions? No? I'm not sure if this is the right forum for it. It's sort of between you and Jeff, as you as the collecting of the data, and then Jeff as he does his work. You know, I've been thinking recently about the increasing levels of very escalated behavior in very young children, very new to a school setting, kindergarten, first grade. And just as we look forward, it might be great to have some sort of parent information page, kind of explaining, because I've had parents say to me, why didn't you just stop them? Why didn't you just pick them up and grab them and hold on to them? You know, and from their point of view, that's a strategy that probably works for them. And that's how they've approached things. And so I have to do a lot of explaining about, well, we're trying to teach different strategies and de-escalation and all those kinds of things. But it's still baffling to a family that's having had a child that has a lot of these behaviors. So it might be great to have some sort of informational page for parents that as your child enters the school system, you know, these are how they approach these matters.
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent thing for the work group to work on as we continue to refine this and get it ready for public viewing.
And let's put a pin in that too around maybe some crossover with our family empowerment centers and parent training information centers to make sure that everyone's on the same page with that.
Steve?
One of the areas that I think that needs to be dealt with the work group is really looking at our teacher training, our credentialing programs, and how much do we deal with this topic in their training and their involvement. With the Sacramento County Office of Education, we do credentialing for induction and also intern teachers. And I was just going through my mind really looking at in the program standards, is there some area that this is required for us to be involved in assisting our special ed teachers in understanding this concept? Whether it be some of the I know training needs to be something in this area that's going to be ongoing throughout their career, but I think the understanding of it in the very initial piece about when you're becoming a teacher, that this is an area that you need to be aware of, and the involvement and what it looks like, and you know, all those kinds of things that you've talked about.
There is a number of LEAs who have taken this and really created really strong policies and procedures, and they've really helped create a training system for their teachers. And so I think continuing to highlight where that's occurring, there's going to be, I think, a lot of emphasis on assistant superintendents who are like, sometimes it's called safety, or sometimes it's called like student support, or whoever sort of like safety and attendance, but sort of whoever is over the discipline area of a district is really, the onus is on them to really help both special ed and general education teachers, because even though we see a lot of instances occurring according to the Office of Civil Rights for students with disabilities, I think it's just better documented there, because you have behavior emergency reports and things like that occur, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those instances are occurring for children without disabilities and potentially associated with disproportionality as well. So I really hope that districts can look towards their assistant superintendents to take the lead to help this be a broad understanding, because this kind of goes back to Havania's concern about making sure folks report this.
I think it's a great point, Steve, around just also working with our higher ed partners, and the guidance that comes out of this will be really useful, because it's not going to be a book. It'll be literally something very tangible and something you can hand all the new teachers, and it's a mechanism for conversation and training. So I think it's a fabulous point.
And one of the benefits we're going to have by collecting the data in this manner, even though it's required in law, is that we can actually drill down at the student level, even at the school site level, and we can look at it by race, ethnicity, by students who are with and without disabilities. We can look at it by a lot of different manners. We can collect it to a number of data. So collecting it in this way, I think, will really help us understand the issues better.
Can I say one more thing? So I think the other thing to point out is I know data is only good as what is reported, right? And so one of the things we want to keep in mind is we want to make this a place for improvement, not a gotcha situation for everyone. And the more that we can make this an effort that we're all banding together to address these significant behavioral issues and give teachers and parents more information and training around it, as opposed to now we're going to publish this list and everyone's going to go after these districts, because that's not a good incentive to be reporting what's happening in schools. And we want them to be able to feel comfortable to be telling the truth, so that if they need help and the districts can look at their own data and say, you know what, we really need to do something about this. That's where the way I think we want to approach it. So as we're talking about it together, and I hope you will all be ambassadors of this too, is that this is a proactive effort to address these issues in California. And this is a really, Shiloh's taken a pretty big leap for our state around really having this data be much more significant than most states collect. And so we have to earn our district's trust in keeping that data in a way that is productive for them, so that they feel comfortable and safe in wanting to improve those actions and activities there. So hopefully we can keep that in the spirit of improvement. And of course, it is our job at CDE to make sure if there is something that's not okay, that we're going in and monitoring and enforcing that. And we certainly have been over the past, few years. But I think this is a great opportunity that could also be a very negative narrative if we allow that piece to take over.
Also, pragmatically, I think that when I worked in secondary, middle school, I was much more proficient with ARIES than when you go down to elementary. Elementary tends to handle things a little different way. And we've all had to become more proficient in our student information systems software. I personally never quite get it right when there's a complicated, series of incidents, and I get the report back, error code, and then I go back and fix it and figure out what I did wrong. So we may have to look at that in terms of just elementary reporting, because I can tell you there are incidents. The behaviors we're meeting with younger children are just increasing dramatically. So it might be a training aspect too, just on the culture of an elementary principal and how they're not used to working in that world as well as secondary principals have been. And we may have to look at that too.
I guess I'm just wondering how practically do you capture the incidents that occur with non-teachers, but with other paraeducators and other staff? Because they're the ones who are usually one-on-one, right? So how does that get How do we ensure that gets captured?
So that's the local policies and procedures, right? So one of the things, and I think Summer really hit on it, and it's one of my other little passions, so I won't get too far up on the soapbox, but is that, we're very, very reliant on the people who are pushing the buttons, right? And sometimes they don't always understand what we're using the data for and what the needs of the data are. And so for all they know, they're pushing buttons that are going to go into a black hole. And so when you have a district that has really committed to having strong data quality and good data governance so that they have a manual that says this is what we do for our district. And it doesn't matter if you've been here 5 minutes or 5 years, you can go somewhere and you can see what the requirements are. If you're an elementary school principal or a high school principal, you know what the expectations are and the definitions are the same. So that's really when it comes down to those local policies and procedures, to answer your question, is they have, when this incident occurs, this is who's responsible for entering it, and this is how it's done. And so that's really important. And more districts struggle with that than you would imagine.
Are there any public comments, Aaron?
No public comment cards at this time.
Well, this was a really great presentation. Thank you both, Jeffrey and Shiloh, for coming and sharing what you know about this. I look forward to being a part of the work group, and we'll keep working through this issue over time. Thank you so much. All right, commissioners, we're moving on to item 13, and this is where we just have a little moment to catch up on updates and liaison reports, what kinds of ways you've interacted with the community in your daily lives, and anything that you'd like the commission to be aware of in terms of work that you've done relative to the conversations that we have here. Why don't we, Mike, have you been up to anything in your first year of college that's important for us all to know in terms of this work?
Nothing pertaining to this, no, just schoolwork. That's it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
We're all proud of you
Thank
for
you.
that. So Christine, and Dawn, we have liaisons where if there's an area of the work that you find is particularly interesting to you, then we can consider you to be our person in the field that, stays in touch with certain elements of students with disabilities. And then you would use this time to report back on something that you've learned or someone that you met. Sometimes people meet with their local legislators and share out information that they gleaned from them. It could be all kinds of different work. So please let me know as there's areas that you might feel that you would be able to be a liaison for us. And if I can see an area of need and reach out to you, I might do that too. My understanding is we had a change of conversation over the break, and just in terms of our goal award, and Steve reached out to both of you, and I want to thank you for being willing to be readers for our goal award. I think that's a great opportunity for you to start to see the great work that's being done out there in the field. Janine, if you had anything to share?
Well, just in general, just overall, I think we're walking billboards for students with special needs, and also just participating overall with the mental health aspect of it and how we could all service that, and also just being able to be supports for students and being able to, just to advocate for them and be their voice. So overall, just working with the associations, with the psychologists, with the mental health providers, and also locally making more connections in my local area with the representatives, and just being out there just to be able to, and school board members. So I think just getting that voice out there, saying that, students with disabilities, just to be able to be part of the inclusion and being able to do all that.
And I learned from you. Do you want to say your incoming, tell us about that?
Well, I'm the incoming president for the California Association of School Psychologists. So we have an exciting, hopefully a year ahead of us. That'll happen in July. And of course, the focus will be about just lifting a lot of it's like unmasking, because we always think that every student, it's like they're defined by their label, but it's more about lifting that mask and just seeing the true child, as opposed to let's define them by their disability. So that's the theme, unmasking the true potential for all children. So hopefully you guys will all join us. It's in Palm Springs in October next year. So, and it goes with the theme because it's Halloween weekend, so unmasking. So see? Yes.
Sarah?
I don't believe I'm an official liaison to anything or anyone at this moment. I'm wondering, as ACSE, do we have a kind of standard list of who we want to, be liaisons with? And with people shifting, coming off and coming on, it may be good in the future for us to kind of revisit that, because there may be people who have certain areas of expertise or passion that want to become those liaisons.
We did have that. I remember seeing it when I first started. I know I have been liaison to the assessment division, and that's been really informative for me, just in my work and also with ACSE. And I think it's been interesting that we have monthly phone calls, and I'm listening to everyone's point of view, and then I may contribute something, and it's always enlightening when the whole group goes, "Oh yeah," and you think, "Oh, I'm glad I was on this phone call," So it's that kind of thing. If anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to shift that over. I've been doing that for some time, but I agree. I was state board liaison. I didn't come to the meetings, but I would watch them online and just try to keep track of what they were doing as a commissioner, just kind of watch that for a short period of time. So maybe we should find that list and send it back out. Yeah, that would be great. We also talked about in the operations and planning meeting yesterday that with certain commissioners terming out and new people coming in, we were hoping to put together that sort of training overall kind of commission time for, when did we talk about that, Aaron? For August, right? So we'll sort of get everyone back in line there. And in the meantime, we'll see who's interested in those liaison positions. Steve, do you have anything?
Share that, there's an area that we're really focused on in my region, and the issue about looking at the shortage of credentialed teachers, and especially in the area of special ed, as well as the area of speech pathologists, which is a huge issue for us. And I would we're trying to identify how can we get more qualified, more involvement, working with CTC, and we know that that's been one of the commission's kind of focus too, as we look at the credentialing of special ed, but actually addressing the need. All of our districts up and down the state, that's been a huge issue as we start to look at. So we're taking that on in our at the county office, in the sense about looking at how can we collaborate with all of those entities to kind of work on getting that solved, in the sense about the qualifications. So it's a huge project, and I would just say that if it's something that the commission could continue to support and be involved in, and looking at that through the credentialing piece and those areas, it would be helping us as districts are working through that process.
Well, and something that you said earlier too about exposing gen ed and special ed teachers to that whole restraint conversation, because those dramatic events to a brand new teacher can speak volumes about teacher retention. I've known 3 in the last few years who have enjoyed the work and been a great new teacher. And then over the summer, you find out, oh, whoops, they've gone to work for, this company or that company. And that can be sometimes because dramatic things happen and they weren't aware that can occur or feel comfortable about that. Let's start back at Dawn. You will decide what you are interested in. Do you have anything now that you know of, or?
In that, but what I really want to bring to the table is the parent perspective and my daughter's journey specifically. And I just wanted to share with everyone that I do share her daily life on social media, on Instagram and Facebook. And I try to show the fun stuff, but also use it as a resource for other parents, for teachers. I have teachers that follow her. I share accommodations that are made for her to help in her inclusion on a daily basis. So if anybody wants to follow along, it is Emmy, EMMY, is a star, and it's both Instagram and Facebook. So you guys are welcome to follow along on that journey and share it as a resource to other parents. And the other area that I wanted to talk about is communication. It's shocking to me how many kids that have severe disabilities like my daughter don't have any access to any sort of communication. That's been a big focus for us since she was small, and it's a long, slow process, but she always has access to communication whether she uses it or not. And so I share a lot about her AAC journey and all of that as well. And so that's another area that's really important to me.
Nice. And, you know, when you're sharing your own personal story, you inform so many other people that are watching and get inspired. I remember bringing a sister of a teacher that I worked with who had started a small business with her autistic son because he loved baking. And so I was so taken with her journey. And she's kept in touch with me since she came up and presented with her son here a few years back. And I follow her on Facebook, and they have a small business. You know, they've catered weddings and all kinds of things now. And so your journey really helps other people understand avenues that they can go to. So it's really inspirational.
Yeah, I'm surprised I get messages from speech and language pathologists who ask me questions and want to know more about Emerson, and her story really inspires them to think about things maybe differently. And so all different kinds of people.
Nice. Havania?
Well, I don't have an update, but I have been the liaison for CTC, the California Teachers Commission. They are designing a special ed TPA Teachers Performance Assessment for Special Education. So they have a big work group on that, and they're going to be coming up with something in the next couple of years. But I'm not on that work group, but that's the latest thing.
Can I jump in? I'm in that work group.
Yes, I just received that message. Yes, go ahead. Good. Yes.
Started, so.
Aaron just informed me of that. So great. You'll keep us apprised. Michelle?
So I'm not on any, liaison positions or work groups, although my biggest interests are transition, which I just think is woefully lacking, you guys, transition planning. And I am planning a big transition workshop conference down at my school in Southern California. So if anybody wants more information, just contact me because it's open to high school parents who might be interested in supports that kids can get post-secondary, whether it's in university or college or through the DOR or Department of Rehab Regional Center, some of the vendors of the Regional Center, as well as workshops on executive functioning and young adulthood and stuff like that. So that's one thing I'm very interested in. And the other thing I'm interested in is anything that has to do with the governor's look at an alternative diploma, perhaps, for some of our students who are currently on certificate of completion. So I'm throwing my hat in the ring on that one. So if there's any way I can get on that work group, I'm all over it. Thanks.
Thank you, Summer. I would love to just mention I had the honor to sit in the state leadership team meeting this past week on inclusive early ed practices. And it's a group that was created out of the budget process last year and led here by the department and Sheila Self, who's currently in the department or the Division of Special Ed, but moving to early learning. She did a great job of bringing together folks that are going to be involved in the early ed grant money. But I think the reason I want to bring it up is similar to what I said earlier, that the consistent language across systems and the alignment across systems, I think, is just so incredibly exciting. And we've heard it through multiple speakers over the last 2 days that the importance of bringing so many systems together. But at this meeting this week that the department hosted, we had Department of Rehab, we had mental health, we had folks from the medical field, we had DDS, we had First Five. Everybody was coming together. And again, still in that place of trying to figure out how to translate language across systems. But at the same time, having everyone in the room was just another testament that that notion of one coherent system that everyone's buying onto is actually now, we're seeing that tangible evidence come up in our work. So I want to thank the department and just congratulate those that are committed to keeping this conversation going as we as we align systems. And as Carla mentioned earlier in our presentation, collaboration seems like it shouldn't be that complicated, but it actually is. So thank you.
We all are liaisons to you somehow, so I'm not sure if you contribute to this. Okay, we'll move right into our State Special Education Director's report from Kristen Wright.
Thank you. As you've heard the last few days, there are a lot of very exciting things happening in the state right now. Watch out what you wish for, because you may be included in everything, and special education certainly feels like it is included in everything. And now, as you saw in the budget, it's also a huge focus at the highest levels. And so some great signals from the governor and the Department of Finance and the legislature around things that they want to assist with students with disabilities, and are excited to do that work. And so a few things I wanted to highlight. I was on a call this morning. I sit on the board of the National Association of State Directors of Special Ed, and we speak regularly to Lori Vanderplug, who's the Office of Special Education Programs Director. And she shared that tomorrow in the Federal Register, they'll be putting out the new information and guidance around the indicators. So that Shiloh talked about yesterday, we were waiting to find out if there were any changes to the indicators. Those will be posted tomorrow, according to her, in the Federal Register. And so if you go online to OSEP, you'll be able to see those tomorrow. And then in terms of this ongoing systems coherency work, as the state systemic improvement plan sort of noted when Stacy did her presentation on the first day, there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle that are coming together, and Carla sort of bookended that today with talking about the state system of support. So just like we ask districts to look at their data, we have to look at our data and say, where are the areas that we need to be focused on improvement, and how are we going to do that? And so just like the districts have the state system of support, the states have a system of support that's provided by the Office of Special Education Programs. And in California, and in many states, we use opportunities from the National Center for Systemic Improvement. And our own West Ed received a new 5-year contract to provide states with technical assistance. So one of the big participation areas that we work on through that effort is around results-based accountability. And we talked earlier about how our system is trying to shift more to results and less just on the compliance measures. But what I will say is, even though we are shifted towards results and we're trying to spend more time on outcomes and what compliance efforts track to outcomes, there are still requirements under the law around timelines and procedural safeguards and other things that we will always have to do until the law changes or if it doesn't change. And those things protect students and families around just ensuring that things happen in a speedy way and that kids are getting their free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And so we will continue to monitor those things, but we will also have this larger focus on improvement. So we are getting help from the National Center on that. And we're also in the process of working through a pretty major federal court case called the MSC Ravenswood case, which involved a school district and plaintiffs. And now really everyone who's been involved in that case for more than 20 years is now not in that case except for the state. So the state is defending itself on whether or not our monitoring system suffices under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act to properly monitor districts. So there have been some changes, and will be probably a few more changes over the next few years relative to negotiations within that case. And the reason I bring that up is because we have currently sort of changed how we've selected districts for monitoring. And if you want to go into detail about that sometime, you're welcome to. We can have further conversations about that. But what I'll say is that we've changed in some of what we're looking at in terms of the districts that are identified for more intensive reviews are the districts that are the lowest performing 10% amongst the results indicators, right? So we look at those as being assessment, least restrictive environment, things that track to results for students. And so we're doing this activity that we used to call the comprehensive review within those districts that come up in that 10% of we want them to increase their access, but we also want them to increase their outcomes and basically proficiency for students with disabilities. So we'll be working with them this year. That increases our this level of comprehensive reviews from around 30 districts to over 100. And so our staff are busy at work sort of retooling how we can better regionalize some of our trainings, how we're working in teams at a targeted level and an intensive level to work with districts on improvement. So the focus is improvement with still that eye on compliance, but that larger focus on improvement. So we're working with WestEd or with the National Center for Systemic Improvement on, while we're mapping this sort of update to our monitoring system, to also have an evaluation component so that every year, first, here's what our system is, and then how are we going to continue to make sure it's meeting the needs of our state and our kids and our teachers and schools, and how will we continue to improve year to year as well. And we'll keep you informed as that work starts to happen so that you're aware of, you know, what we do and how we do it in terms of our responsibilities under IDEA. So for some of our new folks, we receive, as a state, around $1.4 billion a year from the federal government to make sure that students with disabilities are receiving their education and access to their education and services. And that amount of money covers roughly 8 to 10% of the total costs of special education in the state. So the rest are coming in through local and state dollars. As you heard from Department of Finance, there is a move towards remaking the special education funding formula. There's been a lot of discussion over the last few years, like, yes, of course, everyone wants students to do better, but it's hard when you don't feel like you have enough funding to be able to implement all the things that you want to do for these increased outcomes. And so as the governor and legislature have started to put more money into special ed, they also want to make sure that the way that the money is going out, as well as the expectations that come with that, are all sort of coordinated. And so this next year will be a year of discussions, next couple of years, within the legislative process about what that will look like. And so that work is getting started. There's numerous studies happening in the state. There's some that just came out last week from PACE. I think we'll see more and hear more about that as we roll out the next year. But just so you know, there is a lot of momentum and a lot happening around really trying to update every part of the system that impacts students with disabilities. We sent out, as part of our monitoring, every year we're required by the feds to send out information about how each school district is doing regarding their indicators. And so we try to improve that activity every year. This year we sent out last Friday what we call the mega letter, which basically describes to each superintendent all the activities in monitoring and all the indicator information from the previous year's data. So we tell you, this is what you were monitored for last year. This is the activities we did with you. And here's what we're going to be doing next year based on last year's activities. And then we have to issue a determination for every single LEA in the state. And that includes charter schools, county offices, and districts, and to tell them how they were doing. And we base that on the activities they qualified for in the previous year, which was based on the previous year's data, right? So it's kind of this train track that is all based on data that just happened, because obviously we have to wait for the data to come in. We have to collect it, get it all put in a place, and then run these different methodologies to see where folks fall in the processes that we do. So we have a mighty team in the special ed division who are working hard on behalf of parents and families and districts and the state to monitor and support districts. We have two different areas that we work on. If you want to think about a procedural safeguards area, which we have a lot of staff who work on individual state complaints for individual student entitlements and complaints about whether or not the law was adhered to for individual students under IDEA. We have a large set of staff who monitor districts by region, and those have kind of just been retooled as of lately. And we'll give you more on that later as we start to develop more graphics so you can see kind of how we do that work. We also have, because of our increase in all these great work groups and all the things that are happening around the state, with trying to figure out what can we do to do better for students with disabilities. An example of that is the last year's SB 75 work groups that were created in the budget. One was to get better access for schools to Medi-Cal dollars. And so we've joined in partnership with Department of Healthcare Services to create a new work group that will basically have a lot of stakeholders coming in to talk about all the different ways to access the different Medi-Cal programs to provide school-based health services and services to students with and without disabilities that qualify for Medi-Cal, to make sure that we're maximizing the dollars that we can draw down and provide services directly to the students when they need them and where they need them. There's some great things going on in districts now where they're trying to put behavioral health specialists in every single school to really bring those services to kids and do a lot more prevention. So we want to make sure that those dollars can get to the schools to do that. The other SB 75 group is around the transition from infant to school age, so Part C to Part B. And we're working in partnership with Department of Developmental Services on that to be able to look at the barriers that exist for those smooth transitions. And I know for the parents, we all know that that transition from early intervention to preschool can be traumatic. And so how do we make sure that kids are getting what they need and those transitions are happening smoothly and that they're happening into those inclusive preschool environments where we can really start getting that communication in place and that parents and families are feeling welcome in those environments so that they start on that trajectory, because we also know through the data that once you're on that trajectory of being in a segregated setting or an inclusive setting, that's sort of where you stay. It's very difficult to get off that track. So really resetting that pipeline, that on-ramp, we have a lot of support statewide around that. I think you've seen that with all the dollars and momentum around the early childhood, breaking up the barriers around whether it's actual physical barriers around facilities. There's work going on about some of the community care licensing and other barriers, even about kids playing on the playground together. All those things are being looked at in all different areas to really try to reset the system, if you will. Let's see what else. This is also the first year that we have 3 years of data for significant disproportionality in the new methodology. So we've seen, we've gone from about, I think, 12 districts last year to more than 100 this year who will be significantly disproportionate. The way the new methodology plays out, many of them are for placement and disability categories, so disproportionate numbers of race and ethnicity within certain disability categories within districts, or in more segregated placements. And so, a lot less for discipline. If you're looking at the 3 different areas, you could be significantly disproportionate. So we're going to be really targeting work around and definitely some conversations with the school psychologists, because that's one critical piece that we can really band together around looking at those issues of when kids get identified and then where they go right at the beginning, right? And so we will continue to address the cultural bias, implicit bias around what's contributing to our disproportionality. We take it really seriously. We have a group of stakeholders who we've been working with for the last few years who've been really helpful. We will continue to build out our resources, and we're actually training all of our monitoring staff around these issues so that it's not just one group dealing with these issues around bias. It's really our whole staff who starts to get grounded in the foundational understanding of how you address these issues. One of the sort of hot topics that you've probably heard a lot about is around an integrated system of care. I want to just give you some words that we're talking about. And you've probably heard the governor and some of his talks talk about a California for all. And I think, for us, the California for all fits a really nice umbrella narrative, because if we're talking about California for all, we're talking about each and every student with disability as well. And so how do we fit within that narrative? And part of it is that interconnection around the integrated system of care. We know in special ed that we can't do it all by ourselves, and that our students with disabilities are not just students with disabilities. They're students who cross over every other student group that we have in our state. So how are we working collaboratively? One good example of that would be some of the work that we've been doing and that some of our sub-leads have been doing around English learners and, with disabilities and students with disabilities who may be English learners. We have some guidance, guidelines that were put out not too long ago, July 2019, and so there's been a lot of work around the state around training. I just did a presentation with the director of not early learning, of English learners at the Equity Conference this past week with a full house learning about our new EL special ed guidelines and getting momentum around how do we make sure to pull those pieces apart and myth bust a lot of the myths around where that crossover is between language and disability and communication. And let's see. Our challenges and opportunities, I would say that we continue to need to just do better at connecting with the field and connecting with parents and making sure to get information out. I'm seeing Kelly nod her head in the back there, yes. I try to get out in the field as much as possible to talk with teachers and parents because I feel like that's the way that we're really norming how some of these issues are translating and what the barriers to those issues are so that we can address them and not just assume like, you know, we said this is what we're doing and everyone's like, that is not even possible. Like, you know, that's a nice idea, but that's not really working very well. So being able to talk with teachers, especially, I had a chance recently to go to San Diego. One of the former commissioners here, Stacy Begin, invited me to come out to talk with teachers in one of their big training days and parents. And it's just really, it's good to go out and hear what's actually happening. And so, you know, I'll continue to do that. And I hope everyone knows they can always reach out to us anytime because we are only as good as the feedback that we receive about how we're doing. This is definitely the season of conferences and trainings. And so as commissioners, if you see things, you are representatives of this body. And so if you see things or invited to go to things, please let Summer know. And she is your chair. Will be able to help, you know how to navigate that piece of it. We hope that you'll go out and be visible so that parents and others see you as an asset. You are all really conduits to your different roles in the system. And this is one place where all the focus is on, students with disabilities. And this is where things come out. So I just want you to know, there's no fear here for you to go out and do your best work around representing the commission. Whatever we can do to help support you in that, please let us know. And just let Summer know, though, so that she can make sure to coordinate with us in case there's any kinds of reimbursements or anything like that. And I think that's kind of the update. I did want to mention that we're excited about the upcoming work groups, the alt diploma pathways work group that's proposed. These are all still proposed in the budget. The IEP template, I think, could give us some possibilities of really thinking about rethinking more of a person-centered IEP process in the state. How wonderful would that be? We've been talking about that for a long time. And I had the opportunity, since I last saw you, to go on a vacation, a personal vacation with my youngest daughter. She's taking a gap year. And so we went on a trip to Israel as part of her learning. And I try to take the opportunity to visit schools when I go anywhere, just so I can get a different view of things. And it was really interesting. We visited schools in Jerusalem and in Bethlehem. And all of the same things that we worry about and issues that we have are so similar in other countries. And this is the third country I've been to just try to see what other people are doing. And issues around kids and behavior and around an uptick in autism diagnoses and communication issues for kids with significant disabilities. I saw PECs in Hebrew. It was very interesting. The 2 points I just want to mention is, one, there's some out of the box thinking about how to use related service providers. I went to a school that had a lot of occupational therapists, and I said, wow, you guys have a lot of occupational therapists here. And they said, well, we use them for our transition age youth. That's who works with our transition age youth, which I thought was interesting. And the second one is that all the kids for all the schools that we visited, even kids with more significant disabilities, were all learning 3 languages. So that idea of being able to be a dual language learner that we talk about a lot, it's just a given in some other countries. So it's always exciting, and I recommend if any of you are going places that you just reach out to the local folks and go visit places. I know Maureen Burness always talks about doing that when she goes to visit places too, and it is a really good idea. It gives kind of interesting perspective. Other than that, thank you for doing all the work. I think you've had a great 2-day meeting, and it's really a pleasure being your state director.
Thank you, Kristen. The thing you said about traveling reminded me of an experience I had years ago where the district where I was had made some sort of arrangement for school site administrators from England to come over and spend time with us. So I hosted one, and she happened to be running what in their system was a separate school for students with significant disabilities. And at the time, I had a student in first grade. She's young. We were just getting to know her. She had she didn't have much communication, cerebral palsy, a lot of issues, and we were just all trying to get to know, this child and how best to serve her. So here comes this principal who's following me and shadowing me, who's an expert in a lot of these children. So she came and watched me, and we went and visited the girl in class, and she explained to me so much of what was happening in a way that no one here had explained to me, and she said, no, just wait. It's just going to take her longer, but she's going to get to, have a response for you. And sure enough, so our wait time wasn't long enough, right? So she taught me that, and she was so expert, and I felt while she was talking to me like, oh, we're so deficient, she's just teaching me so much I didn't know, and we should have known this already. And we walked outside, and she started crying. And I thought, oh, what's happening? Why is she? And she said, I realized I just shared a lot of technical information with you, but she said to be able to see this child in that inclusive setting, she said, I've never experienced that. And that's why she was crying. And she said, if I tried to get one of my students to go to the local school, they would, I'll never forget her phrase. She said, they would have been invited to the hallway. And that's never left me. And I thought, okay, we're doing something right. We are maybe we have room to grow and things to learn, but we are doing something right. So it's nice to have these experiences that put sort of the work we do in perspective, and that's really great. Steve.
I just wanted to acknowledge you, Crescent, and as I travel around in different circles and involvement, and when we hear that you are the director of special education, what you have brought to special education and the leadership that's involved in the state is phenomenal in a lot of ways. And people send that message to me constantly about how much they just appreciate your leadership and your involvement. I just wanted to share that with you. Mm-hmm.
I think we're ready for public comments.
Yeah, we have 2 public comment requests. The first is Kelly Connell-Sandler from CTA.
This was a great 2 days, just an absolutely great 2 days. It started a little bittersweet. I'd already told Barbara I wasn't going to make any eye contact with her because I'm a crier and she's a crier, and so we'd agreed on that. But it was wonderful to welcome new commissioners and to already have your positive contributions. Then it was hard saying goodbye to Matt because he's just been so sweet and so helpful, but he was kind enough to introduce, and I did get to give him a little bottle of Cabernet, so that was good, but to wish him well. But he was kind enough to introduce me to Aaron, who's already been a godsend and so helpful, and it was such a nice transition. So I think it's all been just positive, windows and doors and new beginnings, which is all good. But the last 2 days have been great, and we shared with Sarah a little bit too. everything you're saying here today, including what Stephen just said, and because I'm in here too, I don't make contact with you either, Kristen, when I say the positive thing. But the feeling of growth, and Rebecca Acord is my co-liaison in the back. We trade off. CTA sends us here yesterday, and you may already know him. He was new to us, and it's a wonderful asset to us. But we have Efren Mercado, who many of you work closely with, who is now one of our liaison coordinators, brand new to us, came here twice yesterday to talk with us and had conference call with us before. So these are all, positive things. So what I really wanted to say was that despite the kind of goodbyes, there were so many hellos, and the ongoing process has been great. And the culmination of it, and I was listening today, and I kept hearing alignment, California for all, one system. But yesterday we were sharing how good it feels that what felt like pieces of an elephant not that long ago is all coming together, where people are sharing. We did come here with hot topics. We came here with a bunch of hot topics, the governor's budget and a couple of positive but unintended consequences things, teacher training and the need. There are serious concerns about suspension data and safety that teachers are really dealing with and everybody's dealing with. But no matter what the topic was, as I was listening, and we listened pretty carefully, I could tell everything's being worked on, that the feedback is being heard, that it's being addressed, that it's ongoing. And I felt sorry because I kept hearing Aaron go, I have no public comment. I'm going, you don't know yet that can be a good thing. That really can be a good thing. What it meant was it's a work in progress. But we really believe it's a work in progress. We really believe the input's being heard. We believe they're being responsive to it and that it's being addressed. So then we can kind of simmer and go, okay. So the other thing that I really wanted to say was just how positive it feels. And thank you for including us and for reaching out. And Kristen continually does it. And I heard the word teacher more often than I've ever heard it in the last 2 days in this body. I also heard it when SECO came and said we want to be part of this and we want to be in on the ground floor, and I thank them because I think that's the most important thing we can all do is work proactively rather than reactively. And on that happy note of California for all, timely happy note from CTA, just a reminder to please do the research and reflect. We want not just what's best for our kids, but who's best for our kids in California, and please vote, thoughtfully, carefully once, but at least hopefully, but do it, please. And thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure. It really has been. And new beginnings, kind of good, huh? Yeah. Thank you.
And it really is nice to see you out of the wheelchair. So we're so happy that you're making that progress.
Next we have Kenya Martinez.
Hello, members of the board. Sorry. It's been wonderful to hear all these great comments. So I feel kind of bad because I have some sobering comments that I wanted to share. Yes. So like I said yesterday, my name is Kenya Martinez, and I'm very grateful to my job for allowing me to attend these meetings this week. I come before you today as a parent, family advocate, and have had the pleasure of serving on my local community advisory committee as chair. For the last 3 years, in doing the meaningful work that I do in serving students with disabilities, I've made an observation. I'm sorry, I didn't bring my glasses either today, so I'm struggling trying to see. There is very little urgency in the business of education. I refer to education as a business because of the systematic manner which it is set up to give students what is considered to be an equitable education. I'm aware that most of you don't know me, and this is the first time you are hearing my voice. Therefore, this message is meant to be intentional, which is urgency. For the last 11 years, I've had the privilege of being the guardian of my adult sister, who has both an intellectual and developmental disability. I attended her graduation as she received her certificate of completion, and watched her struggle to secure employment and find her way in life. For almost 3 years, she has been employed part-time and took it upon herself to begin a conversation with me about moving out of my house and attending college. Although she understood there might be obstacles, she remained committed. Over the past few months, I have seen a sense of belonging and genuine optimism when I assisted her in filling out a FAFSA form. My sister became excited and almost euphoric regarding her life possibilities. Throughout the time she has lived with me, I have seen her saddened by the fact that she has watched my children receive what she believes to be is a specialized academic instruction throughout their IEPs and their educational career. I've heard her express her frustration about wasted time, the depressive future, and overall lack of possibilities. The update on the annual performance report was both informative and eye-opening. I appreciate the comparisons provided. However, I want to focus on the indicator 5A's proposed targets. Our proposed target for 2020 is 58% with an average increase of around 2 to 3% yearly, with each point representing an estimation of 7,000 students. While work is being done to improve the outcomes of these students, my thoughts go back to my sister. She is one of many young adults with a disability who fell through the cracks and did not receive an equitable education. This was always a young girl who could learn and be independent with the support, but did not receive a truly adequate education. I believe the reason why her learning differences were not recognized were not only due to her being a woman of African American descent and living in a socio-economically disadvantaged neighborhood. It was because there was very little urgency. My motto is, and if you get to know me, I say it all the time, my children will be fine. My concern is young adults like my sister who will graduate from school this year, over the 300,000 students who will fall through the cracks, who feel like they never had a chance, who live and breathe and hopefully go into the workforce or not, but simply we're not given the opportunity to learn because our educational system tends to function in a state of caution instead of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciated your comments, both of you. For our new commissioners, so that I'm not sure this has been explained to you, during public comments, we absorb the information and consider the information and process it, and it can be informing to us as we make decisions on agenda building and things like that. We're not afforded the opportunity to make comments on the public comments, but they're always very appreciated, and we thank you very much for coming here and sharing your perspective. We are down to the last item of the day, and that's agenda building, and I say that with some reservation because as I talked to Aaron after yesterday's meeting and the outcomes of the two work groups, legislative and policy, we are having to kick things off the already made April meeting, I think, or move them around or restructure in order to accommodate the work that both groups did yesterday. But that is actually very exciting because it's been common. It has been a common thing that we've all experienced for that have worked on the commission for a while, that sometimes you work in work groups and the timing's wrong, and you have these great conversations and you want to move something forward, but then it's just not quite right, or we don't have a meeting in the right time frame. So while it might be kind of compressed and tight, as you explained yesterday and before we go to the Capitol, I think we can take some of the work that we did yesterday and have it inform our Wednesday time on in April, and be able to move some ideas forward so that we can have our Thursday trip to the Capitol be very targeted to the work that we did at this meeting. So that's a good thing. That being said, we are interested in hearing your points of view in terms of conversations or directions that you think we should go, maybe not for April, but beyond April. And this is your chance to share that information if there's anyone that has anything to share. Janine?
I'm just wondering if we're going to have anything on mental health, because I believe that's what we had mentioned a few months ago when we decided to not have the subcommittee meeting. So then just to bring that back in some way and get speakers or something, what's going on about mental health. Update, yes.
Thank you. Havania?
I know we already captured this, but I just wanted to double check that we are going to bring back to the floor AB 1914, inclusive education, and the bill AB 2056 for April meeting.
That's our intention. We have to have time to work with the people that were already lined up for certain slots, and David and Aaron and I will work on that, but that's certainly our intention from yesterday. You're right. If we don't do that, we can't do anything for Thursday. Yes, so that's our intention, but we'll have to wait until after today to do that. Sarah?
I think it's just reiterating kind of what came out of the policy group yesterday, and that's really kind of longer term, not necessarily the April meeting, but looking at those various pillars and saying what haven't we gotten an update on in a while, just to make sure that we're still, looking at all those different areas.
So I'm hoping that David is at home sleeping, having partaken in some Dayquil or something like that. But I'll be talking to him this week, and Aaron and I will look into that. All right, before we conclude, I'm going to be a little indulgent again. And we certainly celebrated Gina as she transitioned from chair. But as we said yesterday with Barbara, often we don't know when people are terming out and when it might be their last time. I know I'm going to be terming out at the end of this year, and there's a few of us that have been working here for some time that might be making a transition. So in the event that your governing body replaces you between now and our next meeting, and this is where I get really lousy at public speaking because I get emotional. I really want to thank you. Hang on. You really encouraged me as a person that lives in the gen ed world to continue to move forward and speak up for students with disabilities. And I wasn't always clear that I had a place. But your leadership really guided me, and Kristen too. And I want to thank you. I know that I'm going to continue to see you because you're so busy and you're everywhere and doing important work. But I just personally wanted to say that. And if it turns out that you're not here, I hope we see you in the audience with Barbara. Because it will be very amusing to see the two of you still pass Post-it notes back and forth to each other. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying thank you for all the work that you've done for ACSE. I don't know that anybody wants to follow my tears now. I know I wore pink yesterday. I wore red today. So that was my reminder to try to be the heart and soul that I'm not always am and recognize these important events like Valentine's Day. And wish you all a very, very happy Valentine's Day and safe travels home. Thank you for all your hard work the last 2 days. And we will see you again in April. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Do we have to do all that kind of thing? No, we're done. Okay, we're done. Thank you very much.